back then, I used to be a design engineer. When we're using the working stress design method.
No, it has to be a little bullshit thing, just to get practice.
No, well that one's elevated. It was an old elevated rail line.
Factor of safety.
Ours is
Yeah, a little
probably
complex.
like the cadence rail line.
This is what they
Right. Yeah, super nice. That's right. And the
And we don't even design like that. They have resistance factors.
Right.
again,
Right.
I
think there's
Oh, just so you first buy the proposition.
because you get it for less, and then when you do
No, we're not doing this for free. Just by virtue of doing the parts, people want to be my golf course.
When we met,
People don't want to be my golf course because there's friends that come by.
like a lot of stuff we can control is covered up.
So incorrectly.
I think golf is safer.
So why do you think Trump's got so
And makes a lot of shit.
I mean, it was.
Yeah, public shitty, the carpet's crazy.
Like 2 miles out was well, but then like that 2 miles out, it was like dirt poor. We're so hourly hotels. It's like
And they can buy it for almost nothing.
hourly hotels are.
But that's still the same thing as you pay the money. Because if you're not buying it, if you're not buying cash.
Right, where you lost.
Pero you know, you have to look at your investor and ensure that
Right, so if you don't have
That access to an hourly hotel.
it's gotta be legit, you know, it's gotta make sense.
And then you rent it out after you get a mortgage. Why would you get a mortgage after you get
Yeah, I think
No,
that's.
no, listen, it's not staying, you know, confianza, yo no got nada. So, mándamelo, I'll take a look at it. Let me get something.
I want to do something this year.
Oh yeah, just started. That's awesome.
We find something.
And then of course the train thing.
We could, like,
Very simple thing, right? Build the
I would
train.
love to do that.
And
And then it was like hard to find like
You're
the
down
location.
here, I'm upstairs. On
university.
Wow.
Well, yeah.
That's not it.
It's taxation.
Say yours.
No. So if you go up university, past the highway, I'm up that way on that side, past the highway.
Well, that's actually.
That was embarrassing.
That's the best I can explain it because I'm not from here.
Somebody in the English, and then they throw out their name in Spanish. Like, hey, how are you doing? My name's Dave. I'm doing good.
You get like
Miami car, I will sit for you. Yeah, well, that way to the hotel.
a bed and breakfast. I would love to have one of those.
The only bad thing is traffic.
I think that'll be fun.
Yeah, I gotta go to work. I live in Fort Lauderdale.
So what?
Step up from a hospital.
I just meant like
Step down from fast.
Why doesn't come on the real wall?
No. Going to work. From Fort Lauderdale to Coral Gables is like an hour.
I mean, right now I'm driving from my state all the way to Fort. So mine is about an hour and 5 minutes.
It's opportunity there.
An hour to
Right.
Yep. 95
Well, Venezuela, Colombia are next to each other, so they are.
I'm like, oh, maybe.
No, for some reason.
It was 2.1. I take the express line every time, and even that.
Yeah, I think or the expressway is not really an expressway. That's like the double line.
I went to sleep early.
Even though
I
I
was
don't
like, I cannot come back.
I've never
I was tired.
That's a good question. I need to research that.
I was trying to get some chocolate.
Hey, when you
It's actually good. I stole my money the first week. I haven't been back there. They got me fired. First week, it's still not out.
Did you get a song? It didn't come out. That's what he just said.
So you guys know anybody?
Tomorrow, you can't work tomorrow.
Panama City, yeah. I'm going over there too. Go vacation. No, Panama City, Panama. Yeah. I thought when you said Panama City, I thought you meant.
How much it is?
I heard it's like so ratchet and crazy.
I literally busted.
Everybody in my school had to go to the clinic. They came back on the fifth grade.
Started out.
Yeah, you can't do any of the
I mean, it's okay, we all liked it or something. At the end of the week, everyone went home. Everyone either got in jail or went home.
What the fuck are you guys doing?
I stepped out for a week.
Are you gonna do a lot of places?
How much are they?
Like the thing is, I was thinking like
I did my spring break, it was just 4 of us. 4 of us was enough. And even that was a little drama filled.
They're the prime. No, they're the prime.
See, that's what I was thinking.
And then you're like,
How great a weekend I had. Get back on the road.
Real estate development.
That's so annoying. I'm so annoyed. Yeah. And then you think you know your friends, and then you start knowing you. I'm like, why would I get this? Oh, I don't want to sleep here. Look at this. I'm like, like my one friend that I thought was like a trip or something. She became a grandma on the trip. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, we didn't come here to sleep. Like, what the hell?
We can't take it. We are working with 50 years, and you call me,
hard part, yeah.
Like I know.
In general, because I mean, 40 just kind of stuff. But here, it's like learning how to also, I'm going to take next one. You can't stop. I just like, I feel like the test should be recording because I forget, like, I'm already stressed with the other YouTube, I'm forgetting the it does, but yeah, the last one. In the back, I was like,
Yeah.
Just one little thing.
I was like, I'm tired.
You know, they're trying to make money. They would sell those.
So he structures whatever we learn.
The way I see learned from their warehouse, they only have one center. So maybe Miami will, but they're trying to develop it and sell it to
These are my notes. They are. So, like, right there, and then, like, you guys use your notes to, like, follow along. So, you, like, my average is 70, so I can
It's not just talking about that, you know,
the next week.
but not the last. No, the great idea. There's a lot of different ways, not here.
No, but if you do good on the quizzes, you don't take tests, which is better. Everybody took tests. Yeah, so the next week I'm not taking this test.
The guy that grabbed him.
How did you do on it? How did you do on it?
I'm gonna take it then, right?
Yeah.
The problem is, I worked all
What's the average on the quiz?
I went for the
Oh,
I know that day.
First one, like the senior man?
No, for like the whole year.
So I didn't know how to get a test. It can't be that bad. I mean, at least it would be actually one person and then four. Overall guy. One more guy. What's funny is that they don't.
You think good on the quizzes?
I don't know if I could tell.
Well, you never know who's gonna find your
You?
Okay.
Well, like even on mine, like we do a lot of
He takes the 5 hardest questions for each quiz.
So I use check mark number
like I'm like
on the test.
reading
I
through
first like 11 right the last
trying to figure out like whether a tenant.
So that's I'm doing good.
You know, and so we kind of support which is great. It's great to learn the business. Because ideally, I want to that side. I understand like your subject. We may not understand why we're not getting the money for this because
So you get 3 tries during a class session, and then you get a final try if the end of all your class sessions you're not having.
Yeah, if you can't get it by then, it's
Right.
it's like see how it all.
And so, like, basically, according to this, what's it called? Next week, if I want to pass all 3 those, I'm check out.
Well, that's what you guys check out.
Yeah, basically, it's happening.
So that you're mad.
Then you did like.
So like, by the time I leave, I'm driving home, it's like, I'm trying to get there, you know, I crash. I'm trying to make it like crash. I used to like try like the high energy, like I would get like a hot chocolate and a brownie. But then I would crash.
We used to teach 7
After they Saturday, which by the way, we're gonna get back to our For me, I thought it was 11:30. And I was guys, you are watching instructor, you have one, and then you come upon it. So I got into the room, or like 12, then I'd stick around and have lunch. You know, but you definitely need that break, you know. In the fall, in the August term, I was trying to be.
I'm sorry, I'm in the seat.
It's gonna be every week.
So I'm gonna chill there and do
4 hours, 1 class, 4 hours.
But you can take it out. See what he says. Never guaranteed it.
It's incredible you want such a large, figure into this.
Jeff will help me.
Now it's the fact that showing people that you can do it at any size.
Yeah, when I'm doing the
Starting in March, I think every week I have a class.
Yeah, that's why I want to have like a good.
Every week, September, just a little bit up, and then I'll stop. That doesn't work.
It's great. It's great. I love it. Yeah, working on some great projects. Really incorporating everything I'm doing. Everything. I'm like, everything from the accounting stuff to market stuff to financial class stuff.
I know where they are.
We're doing, we're doing these systems all the time. Because the brokers, they'll send us like the basic information, and they'll be like, hey, is this tenant creditworthy or not? And you're like, why don't you know how to do this? But we have to go and dig through their financials to figure out if these guys, because none of these people are rated by Moody's or S&P, they're mom and pop shop, or South American company that just showed up. They don't have any ratings, and so it's like, okay, are these guys in the black? Are they, broke, and like, everything's based on that lease. So we're trying to sell buildings and build them. And if the buyer's not going to pull the structure, then don't worry, go surfing. I'm literally using everything. Go surfing. You're familiar with the trail area?
I'm saying the worst spot. Yeah. I know, and then we're like, technically one side. I don't know if you know about we're in time.
Was that something you guys are
Which one? So, the Metro Rail, the southern leg runs pretty much along the way, the right-of-way, that you have the FECI right-of-way went. So from downtown, right? It follows the FECI all the way down Dayline, right? And then north, that's it.
We're making money, come on, let's go. What's the deal?
That's
5 years out here, right? So
makes me mad that
the future expansion of Metro Rail, which has been planned but never discussed.
it's hard. Like, might as well do it now.
Because you got to sell it, like, you get a refund for the might as well just take it, which is
Part of the discussion that we had, let's say, on the right of way.
I took 25 to
But you need to get past it, that's what
Yeah, I overhyped.
Did you see it, bro? We're just going to see it.
No, but I feel like just
all the people that
I missed
So how do you get it?
go to Dayline.
I get the conceptual aspect.
And that was always, I told you the
Yeah.
for future, I mean, this may be 20 years from now. Now,
What that, I know, yeah, but it's like
prior to my getting involved,
at the end, you're just like,
that intersection. And what we
that's
did
right
have,
about 8 Street.
no, it's further up, it's right off.
8 hours
Right off
of other
eight-
work, and then we have to get to,
And then,
learn the week.
but you have to sell terminus, there's like 8 acres. You know, we tried to
Because
sell
then,
both, we had
I guess you can come in, they come in.
to do multifamily there. And the whole thing was always. Well, now we know.
It's probably all up in there.
We would tell the air rights to go along, but you know now, that's where it could be. You know, the other thing that this guy Ramon came up with was, oh, let's just build, you know, just go across the fence and then build houses. That's what people wanted. That's what people wanted.
Yeah, I know, he will.
The county doesn't like on that. And you say, well, do a skyline. Well, that's great. You can go linear. As long as you always preserve the vision, you can connect.
And at some point down the road,
They can see your screen.
That's what the you still have rail but they already announced they were going to rip it out. But they actually deserve.
No, they see your screen.
Not all the way down, but up in the middle. So the CSX runs.
Maybe describe.
But they,
You guys have the first
they run here, they serve some people here in Florida, and then they go down to Homestead. And that line still active. And what was valuable in here was that, because it's right there, there was never a problem with the railroad going on up. You would always get the trains out of the railroad. Back out. And that's when you do the railroad. But I mean, all that is gone. Guys, start like sort of reining it in, okay? Start reeling it in. Start reeling it in. At the major intersections, there's retail. That's a good spot. Flagler, on Way, Bird, okay? At least You're not impacting any of what you did. And you can have, just like the Metro Rail had, your elevated line, with the linear parking. There's no reason why you can't. I have no stake in this, but I still think that's the way to do it. If you say, oh, you know, mine is on art, okay, great, but understand the
Oh, that's where you challenge those guys.
because how are you ever going to buy that? You'll never aggregate that money. Okay, hey, yo.
We have a floor.
Yo.
Yeah. So that's an example.
Yo. Does this have speakers?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. 15.
I came. Here, I'll share this with you. I'm always, I'm not like a big music connoisseur, but I came across this girl yesterday. You ever heard of her?
Not like that. I mean, like music is
Isn't she like bougie?
like
I don't know.
music is hot.
We know what you meant.
I'm not gonna get into whether she's hot or not, but how do I know the speaker?
I haven't seen her yet, but she made me.
Oh, love.
You're in love now?
The song is hot.
Brandon, can you throw me one, please?
Yeah.
What's up?
Still have
Oh, you did it. Oh.
Okay, so nice break, lunch. You guys got lunch? Did you get the right whatever? We get the right what?
Yeah, they actually did it right this time.
Put a little bit more mayo on this, you know.
Yeah. Enough phones, okay. So, we're gonna break it about, we'll talk about leases for about 10 more minutes. I just wanna show you a couple of things. So I will send you a, I'll send you this abstract template, which is the one that Glenn used when he did their particular diligence on that building. But you know, they used a spreadsheet, patent suite. In that particular case, one of the things that they did was interesting was every time there was a new modification to the lease, they would color code the tab, and it would color code the changes to the contract. And so, if, for example, you know, they use like purple or whatever. Purple might have been the third modification. So if you wanted to know where the lease rate came from, where the square footage came from, you can see by the color coding on the particular box in what version it came from. And you know, it's just some curious, I thought, an interesting way of visually being able to go back to source documents. Because ultimately, what you want to be able to do is on one page gather all the information that you can put into an Argus model or into any other software tool that you're using, you know, to create your expectation of future cash flows, right? So, you know, who's responsible for cash flow, you know, for expenses, commencement dates, base rents, you know, all the way down to all of the, you know, who's responsible for the TI, repairs, brokerage commission, et cetera, so on down. Security deposit, if there's any in place, so that, you know, anywhere on this page, one could take and summarize, you know, the 40 pages worth of documents here. You know, this lease that, I pull up the one, bless you. So, I didn't print all of them out, but Ana Yegues was an architect leased in, this was like 2006, I believe. So in 2003, she leased like 3,000 square feet, and then over time, by the time I got this, it was on the 10th addendum and the 3rd lease modification. Okay, so you can imagine if you're trying to follow this whole trail, you know, you really need to, you know, sort of, you know, sink down. Before I go a little bit further with this one, I also pulled up from one of the other agreements that, and actually this was an agreement, this was the in-house form that we used at Flagler. So we had a sort of financial area, and we had additional terms, rights and obligations, and a base rent schedule. And in our particular case, this was all for our internal property management software. So we modeled with our property management software, we modeled our cash flows. But we also, as most other institutional real estate firms, we also had Argus runs for the entire portfolio. Not because we necessarily wanted to sell anything, but if all of a sudden you want to finance, or you want to finance a set of buildings, you need to have the cash flows readily available. Or if the opportunity to sell comes up, you need to have that. So we always updated. On top of that, when we talked to analysts in the streets, we wanted to give them our understanding of what net asset value was, right? And so we could value our cash flows. We could put a range of cap rates on our cash flows for the different assets, and we had the Argus run. So we could intelligently talk to the market and say, yeah, our book value is this, our market value is this, but hey, the net asset value of our real estate portfolio is this. You know, this is the way we understand it. We think we've got so much value here. And in the case, going back to the comment you had before, we had a railroad operating company, and we had a real estate business, and we were followed by transportation analysts who didn't understand real estate. So you had to sort of digest for them what we were. So the little guidance that they would put out on the street and the little coverage that we had, at least, you know, would tell the investors what we were about. So we gathered a lot of information, but ultimately we're trying to plug into some sort of, you know, forecasting tool or Argus what those income streams are all about. Okay, so I'm just gonna, I don't want to give you the answers to, but if you take a look at what Glenn and his team did when, so if we go to this particular, so let me make it smaller. So in this particular case, so, you know, they fill in, right? This is the original agreement, right? And they start color coding all of the different modifications. And you know, sort of lay out what all the original arrangements are with the tenant. Now you start seeing that green tab, you start seeing the changes, right? Again, nice, easy, you know, all of a sudden, second modification, 3 months, 3 years. She's down to 1,600 square feet, okay? It's going to run from 2006 to 2009. And then there's a third modification. Yeah, you probably can see it a little bit better, right? Yeah. So, you know, in the third modification, now you start seeing, again, new contract date, 3 more years, you know. The space was measured according to this. They didn't remeasure the space, okay? And then you sort of go through and work out, and then you've got a third one, a third modification, and now that's the one that covers the current period, right? So from 2012 for another 3 years. Well, they've probably got a fourth one now, but this was bought a year and a half ago. So you know, original lease, all of the different modifications, you start laying out all of the different terms. Things that would be of interest to me, for example, would be, you know, on an ongoing basis, they change space, what's her pro rata share? Because every year, not only do I have to bill, I have to take a look and make sure that she's paying her CAM. Do I have any open capital expenditure requirements? Or, as I'm buying the building, does the landlord have any open requirements that they haven't fulfilled? And if this says that they had to do some build out, I'm going to make sure that in an estoppel letter, the tenant says that all the build out and all of the capital expenditure obligations have been fulfilled and that there isn't anything open. Okay? So what I would just, you know, and again, you know, summary, it's a 3-year lease, here's the annual rate per square foot, right? and number of parking spaces. So everything from the lease and the modifications ultimately gets summarized down on. I'll send the teams a spreadsheet, so you don't have to like spend time creating a spreadsheet. You've got a form, and then you guys can distribute it amongst yourselves and the team. But my recommendation is for the leases that you're assigned that I will give to you, you can do it any way you want. Somebody could read the original, and then somebody could read all the modifications, but number one, the learning won't be complete if you break it up. Plus, you're going to rely on somebody else doing the work. So, you divide it the way you want. My recommendation is read the lease, absorb it, read the lease, figure it out, fill it in, fill in all the amendments that you have, okay? You're not going to have 10 amendments to read or anything like that, okay? And then have one person in the group sort of compile it, redistribute it, and make sure that everybody's in accordance with it. I'll let you figure out how you work. Yes, Mariana.
Quick question. I'm just curious with that specifically, when you said number of spaces, like, why is like in this case 5? Like, if that or they only have 5 for
Okay,
that?
so what's typical, right? Depending, so this is really, it's not really a CBD office building because it's not really in the CBD in Coral Gables, but it's close enough to it. It's on Ponce, but touching 8th Street, and so you typically wouldn't see 5 spaces assigned for 1,500 square feet in a CBD environment. Okay, you might get 2. All right, you might get 1 per 1,000 is probably more typical in a CBD setting. In a suburban setting, for 1,000 square feet, you might see 5. For 1,500 square feet, you might see 7. In this particular case, what this tenant agreed was covered as part of the agreement. She pays $60 for 5 parking spaces that she's guaranteed. Now, when she did the modification, the second modification, because there was additional parking there that the building felt they could do, month to month, she can rent another one for $60. So it's up to her. If she wants it, she pays for it. If she doesn't need it, she doesn't pay for it. Make sense? But this is one of the things, and this is a huge problem the more dense cities become. Because when you walk into a building, have you promised more parking than you've got? And the likely scenario is you probably have, because you're gambling on the fact that people have different hours, that not everybody shows up to the office all day, but is it an issue? And that's where tenant interviews, that's where estoppel letters, that's where visual observation are important. Because I can tell you the worst thing you can do is walk into a building and all of a sudden you don't have parking for tenants and you got nothing to do. Because what are you going to do? Then you got to go next door and pay somebody to rent spaces for the person. And if you push me, you might have to get a little trolley or something, a guy in a van that shuttles people back and forth. And I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen. Where you've got to spend 30 grand a year to provide for parking off-site for people. So again, it doesn't seem like much, but those are little nuances that start, becoming relevant in understanding lease agreements and making sure that we understand what as a landlord's been promised and what the expectation of that tenant is. Okay? Make sense? Any conceptual questions on how you would go about, you read the lease, and, would I get overly concerned when you read the lease on, all the sort of, remedies if somebody, no, I'd take a look at it. I'd look at the spreadsheet first and say, what's the spreadsheet asking me for? The spreadsheet ultimately is going to ask you for the financial, financially relevant or important issues, which is I think what we're trying to do in this class, right? So, what do I get as a tenant, and what do I pay the landlord in exchange for that, right? What's the landlord giving me, and what am I giving them in return? Okay? So, I think if you do this, it'll be a good exercise. And at the end of the day, as I said last week, time does not always permit you to, and depending on the number of leases you go to, for you to personally abstract all of the agreements. But I can tell you in this particular case, Glenn had to do this all on his own. You know, he was pretty much a one-man acquisition show, you know, small private equity group. He was identifying the sites and he was doing all the diligence. He did it. I can tell you in my case, I've typically had attorneys do it just because the dollars are big enough and some, you know, small tenant, you know, you may not be off that much. You start looking at leases of 200,000 square feet, you know, large, long lease terms, an error, you know, could be big. And because they are legal documents, having a young attorney look at it might actually give you a little bit more comfort than you looking at it on your own.
So that's just like a summary letter, right? I mean, you're
You
reading
call
a
it-
document of whatever and taking out that data and summarizing it on this front cover.
Yeah, and ultimately, well, the reason you summarize it is because this information then is going to go plug somewhere else.
Yeah, you've
okay?
got 16 pages. It's a summary of the
Of
different.
what that contract is, exactly, exactly.
How many did you have to do for that?
I think there's like 20 tenants or something like that in this building. So, yes, Rebecca.
So pretty much you're taking from that 43-page document, plugging it in there, and then each tenant has a different one of those or a different one of
Exactly, every tenant. So I've got a spreadsheet here that I'm not like, for instance, one of your group is going to be assigned a Burgos and Sosa tenant, right? So that tenant will have a lease and there might be one or two modifications. And so what you'll need to do is read the lease and summarize.
And then you're just plugging in the number.
Yeah, but I mean, you need to understand, right? At the end of the day, the goal of this is understanding your income stream. Yeah, it's not,
Underestimate.
listen, this is not rocket science. If it were, I wouldn't be able to do it. So this is a simple process. It's a simple process of understanding an income stream. But, you know, within it comes your ability. This is a really simple building and it's a simple lease, right? So here you got one tenant's got 1,500 square feet and you've got laid out what the annual rent is. You could have a tenant that has expansion options that doesn't have stated rates but has CPI indices that you need to go and recalculate, okay, and retest and revalidate, right? Because ultimately, the information that's here, you're going to want to validate to the rent roll that the landlord or the seller is representing to you. And you're also going to want to make sure that your Argus run has a proper estimate of what your future cash flows are going to be. And if your lease doesn't have that but says CPI or CPI plus 1 or CPI minus 0.5, you've got to come up with an estimate of what your CPI is going to be and plug that into your Argus model.
And that's going to give you the overall picture of the entire project.
Well, that will give you the entire income stream for that particular lease. And so if you've got a 20, right, so if this building has 20 tenants, right, you know, whatever, that Argus model is going to have in one line the gross income, but it's going to be the summation of tenant A and tenant B and tenant C and D and so on down the line, right? And so what's going to happen, I mean, I think most of you have had the Argus class already.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, you'll plug in a lease term and then you've got to have your assumptions regarding what you do at the end of the lease term. What's the percentage probability of the renewal? How much time is the space that's empty going to stay dark, right? What's the market rate at the time that you renew or that you re-tenant? What is the capital expenditure associated with that retenancy or that percentage that's not retained, right? Or to the extent that you renew, how much TI are you going to give them? How much leasing commission are you going to have to expend? Okay, so that's where all of the different assumptions, and I can go over them. I have it for this class if you want. I can go through the key assumptions that one needs to plug into Argus in order to effectively model your income stream going forward. Because it starts with a lease, but the lease is for a fixed period of time. The question is what happens after that fixed period of time. And that's where, our creativity, and that's where our understanding of the market is going to help us, right? Because when this lease burns off, what's the market rent gonna be, right? And sort of from a pragmatic perspective, and this is 5 years from now, right? You kind of got to start with what's market today and what do you have to do to that? You have to grow that somehow, right? Your assumption has to be that it's going to grow at 2% or 5% or 3% or whatever. Yes, Victor?
Are we going to be exposed to also leases that incorporate sales revenue? So some tenants or some leases are based off of, like, depending on if you reach...
So you're talking about percentage rents?
Right, yeah.
Okay, so in an office setting, you wouldn't see that. You would typically only see that in a retail environment.
Isn't that what we focus on? This class is on retail?
No.
Oh.
Earth calling Victor. Didn't you do multifamily the other day?
I don't know.
You don't remember? Hold on, let me revisit the grades again. No, now, I'm not a retail guy,
Okay.
but I'll tell you this. I always use a retail REIT in one of the case studies in the accounting class. And I can tell you, I have never come across a large retailer where percentage rents are significant, a significant component of revenue. Which is not to say that in certain settings, percentage rents may not be important, but in aggregate, a firm like Simon collects a very small percentage of their revenues as percentage rents. Okay, the bulk of their revenue is stated here. Okay, now, let's assume that you were to come into a retail environment where there is a percentage rent. What would we do? What would we do in that case for our Argus model?
Forecast?
Based on what?
Projections?
What do you mean based on? You are projecting. No, you don't project based on what you know in the future. You project based on the past. So what are things you may do? You may look at the lease and say, here's the guaranteed component of the income. What's the variable component? Okay, they are going to generate, they're going to pay 5% of, gross income, or they're going to pay 3% of gross income over $5,000. Well, what's the history here? What have they done the last 5 years? What are their trends on sales? What are their trends of sales per square foot, right? And then you can plug in the known piece and project the variable piece.
But how do you know that if you're doing a new development and that tenant has never been there?
Well, that's why you get paid the big bucks, okay? No, if you're doing a ground-up development, Victor, that's where your knowledge of, one of the questions that I asked Janae was, why would a retailer know, or how can a retailer know what multifamily practices are in a different country? I'm going to change that question around and say, if you don't know retail, you probably shouldn't be doing a retail development. So my assumption is going to be, if you're going to underwrite a retail development, you will be advised, or you will have co-workers in that sector that know what the heck is going on.
No, I know. I'm just asking.
No, but that's
example, how do you do
no,
it?
but you can't. No, you can't know. Well, I don't know. I mean, you're asking me. I'm telling you, where would I get that information? I'd go pull out 5 or 6 different REITs and take a look at their leasing structures and try to get a sense, at least macroeconomically. That would be my background. Second thing is, I would interview I'm interviewing leasing brokers, right? Part of my diligence in a ground-up development is to have a marketing agent in place. So whether I have an in-house brokerage operation or I'm going to find a third party, I'm going to speak to that broker and have him tell me what the market trends are and what I should be able to expect, getting. So might I ultimately contract that? Maybe, maybe not. But I'm not just going to start an abstract based on, well, I think this sounds good. I mean, I want to talk to a marketing guy that hopefully, for retail, because it's a specialized area. So, brokers. Brokers tend to specialize on retail, and they tend to specialize in industrial or office. There is some crossover between industrial and office brokers. And in fact, there's a very prestigious organization called SIOR, S-I-O-R. And SIOR is a society of industrial and office realtors, right? So there are brokers that cover both spaces, okay? But retail guys are retail guys. So if you're going to do retail development, you better find somebody who knows, and hopefully somebody who's got relationships that can give you a pretty good certainty level on what it is that you should be able to command, right? And what are they going to bring you? Hopefully they're going to bring you comps, right? And they're going to bring you information from CoStar on what competing properties are asking for. I mean, listen, everything we've talked about doing, you should be doing in a ground-up development. You want to do a strip center, you know, I don't know, on Davie Boulevard, right? What are you going to do? You're going to go knock on all the retail centers around and get the leasing flyer. You're going to call all the brokers and ask them what they're asking, right? Then you're going to talk to your broker and say, okay, what can we get? Emmanuel.
On the finance strategy, like if you have no idea what to do as far as it goes to building a ground up, you can find a retail store that already exists, raise the money, and amortize it for like about 25 years. Like you would lose money for the first 10 years. Take the customers from, like build exactly the same store that's making a lot of money right next to it. Take the tenants from the guy next to you. I mean, it's a crazy idea, but if you have the money, kind of like what Uber is doing.
Well, first of all, you never, especially in real estate, which has huge capital requirements, you never build something to lose money. You always need cash flow, because you got to service debt.
Yeah.
So unless you won a Powerball a week and a half ago, right? Before it was only 40 million, when it was $1.5 billion, right? Then you can afford to build something with your own capital, but it wouldn't be the intelligent thing to do, right? Because you would still have to have a capital or return of capital expectation. To your tactic of, I'm going to take the tenant from next door, there's two things that you need to, first of all, separate the real estate component of the operations from the in-house, right? So you say, well, I'm going to build a store just like it. Now, I may build a center just like it. I may build retail space like it, but I'm not going to build a business like it. Am I going to try to steal his tenants? Well, that's where market knowledge also comes in. How much time is left on their leases? Because they can't move while they're tied to a lease, right? Unless you buy their lease out. What's that going to cost you, right? And can you underwrite that, right? So there is something else that I did want to add when you're there, and it's one of the things when we put our phones away that might be relevant and helpful is there is something that we call effective rent, okay? Okay, so what happened, we'll cover this a little bit more in the accounting class, but so a lot of times, especially when you're dealing with startup businesses, is they can't afford to pay you what you're asking. And so you've got to find a way to accommodate them. So I don't want to take a loss, but I know ultimately the effective rent that I want out of a particular lease transaction. And so what I may be willing to do, right, and this is at the end of the day is a net present value calculation, okay? So if what I'm asking to say something is, I want $10 a square foot, and I'm expecting 3% bumps, and I'm willing to do 10-year leases, that's going to be whatever, $15 or whatever at the end of that year. There's X cash flows associated with that, right? I can work back to the same net present value, right? If I know my cost of capital, right? So I can say, hey, maybe I can do a lease with this guy where I'm going to give him a year's free rent. Now he's got breathing room, right? But he's going to start at $11 or whatever it works out to. So I'm working myself back to the same net present value. Or I can start at 6 and go to 7, 8. Now he's off the ground and I go to 12. Boom, and I wind up at 17, right? And what is very common in the industry is to find a way to work with your tenants, right? To facilitate this. And the other value of this as a landlord is you're likely not going to sell the building here. You're likely going to sell it where? Here, right? So somebody's going to say, damn, they're going to pay you on a higher cash flow. So as long as you can finance this, as long as you've got the capital availability to do this, this may be a good tactic, and this is something that a lot of people do. Alexander.
Just a comment, I guess, on the ground up development. Usually, you don't make your money on the big box, you make your money on the out parcel, just a straight ground lease. So when you're underwriting it, you take that into effect where you're going to make most of your money on the out parcels itself compared to the actual inline tenants because they just can't pay as much compared to an out parcel. So when you're underwriting that, even the big box guys like Best Buy, Hot Dog, they don't pay a lot of rent because they know that you make your money off your out parcels as well. So just, when you're building up to do that, you gotta take that into consideration from ground up.
Well, and there's a couple of different plays there too, because not only do you have ground leases on out parcels, you have outright sales as well. And so as a developer, your IRR may have a rental stream component, which has a reversion, plus sales along the way. And again, you'll see this clearly when we go to the accounting class and we take a look at some of the quarterly supplement reports. But in a typical mall setting, following up on this, it should not surprise you that Macy's pays squat and all the other guys pay a whole bunch. So, in today's environment, in-place leases today in large malls, a big box guy is going to pay probably somewhere as low as $4 to maybe they're getting close to $9 to $10 a square foot on some of the newer leases. And the inline guys are probably paying anywhere broadly from $30 to $60 a square foot, depending on the facility. It's a tale of two cities. And if you look at a more neighborhood type center, right? And you've got, what's the big Publix, Winn-Dixie, Publix pays $6, all the other inline guys pay, what was the triple net rent in suburban Fort Lauderdale? You did, wasn't that your group, bro?
That was 2 weeks ago, the finance course.
$16.
It was like 25, I think.
Mid-20s.
No. You guys are all over the place. For some reason, I visually see 15, but I think it was 20.
I said 16.
Let's use 20. Let's use 20. But so if the average is 20, what's happening is the same thing. These guys all pay 30 to 40 bucks out here in the little spaces. But the big guy, he's the fish. He's the big fish that brings out the little fish, right?
Yeah.
And that's what these guys pay for, to be next to the big fish. Okay? You've seen the shark? You've seen the shark, right?
The Publix that doesn't sell booze,
Well, something like that. But you've seen the shark. You've seen the shark, the big shark? What swims underneath the shark?
The feeder fish.
The minnows.
Well, they're not minnows, but they're like it's feeder fish. And what do they eat?
All his leftovers.
All the junk that falls out of their mouth, because they get big things, but little things, and there's little fish that just feed off of them. So all these guys. Yes, exactly.
To service your debt, actually, I was speaking to, I don't want to say his name, but a banker, and he will lend you, let's say, $100 million to do your development property, and will lend you $1 million to be able to service the debt for the 100.
Okay, well, so that.
Now you're servicing the loan for service.
Right, so.
So
Okay.
they're going to lend you a loan to service that service?
So, Emmanuel, so, listen, again, we've covered this, and I'll cover this again in one of the case studies in the accounting class, but it is not uncommon in construction loans to have a built-in interest reserve in which a lender will provide a portion of the loan, not in excess of the agreed loan-to-cost percentage, okay? So within the agreed-upon loan-to-cost value, to set aside a certain amount of money so that interest can be serviced, or payments of interest can be serviced during a construction loan. And there's 2 or 3 major reasons for that. Reason number 1, if you go to a bank to build something, if you go to a bank to borrow money so you can build something, the implication is you have no cash flow. That's why you're going to the bank, right? Plus you're building, you don't have any income coming in, right? So it would not be logical for a bank to expect for you to pay interest, right? Now, there's another practical reason why a bank would give an interest reserve as part of a loan. And that is, we talked about it in the capital markets class. Why is that?
So they keep the loan.
protect their investment?
So the loan has to be classified as current. Because bank credit departments need to classify their loans. In order for a loan to be classified as current and then not have a reserve against it, it needs to be serviced. And so you need to collect interest. So that's how the banks sort of circumvented that. They created this reserve to let you do that. Now, an interest reserve may extend to a post-development period, and I would say pre-stabilization, okay? I would say that we would be hard-pressed to, guys, it's really distracting, and it's like all over the room, and listen, I'm telling you, I'm gonna tell you guys something. I'm gonna quit teaching because of it. I'm telling you that. You don't think it's a big deal because it's your generation, but put the phones away because
it's a calculator.
Okay.
I'm making calculations in my head.
Okay. Just all morning I had phones out. So put them away, please. Okay. Okay. Do it in your head. Okay. But a lender may allow for a post-construction pre-stabilization period. So say 18 months construction, you can tap into the interest reserve. Okay? They may allow you to continue to pull into that up until a point where the building is stabilized. Let's say no more than 12 months. Okay? Right? You may have a construction loan that rolls into a mini permanent. Let's say that the lender says, hey, after construction, I'm going to roll this out for 3 years. Okay? They may allow you, you may be able to negotiate up until this period to pull into the revolver. But once you're theoretically stabilized, no bank is going to loan you money to service the debt. They may have no choice but to restructure the debt. Okay, they may have to come back and say, hey, you know, put some more equity in. Cases that were very severe in 2007, 2008, they started getting into like A and B loans, and you know, they did all kinds of crazy stuff to work themselves. But what a bank is not going to do is to loan you money to provide cash flow. In real estate, you can lever as long as there's cash flow. And the presumption is if you're stabilized and they ain't cash flow, they're going to loan you money to keep you alive. Okay? So you're going to blow some covenant, and you know they may have no choice but to restructure. Alexander.
Are the larger loans usually like a short term, like 5 or 10 years, compared to like residential would be like 30? Or is it case by case?
Well, so since you've taken the capital markets class, maybe
I know the answer is usually 5 or 10. I know. I'm just trying to
no, but why? No, but you're saying look, we're done with this. We can get the lights. We're done with this. So listen, this is critical, but this is where we really need to pull the different classes together, right? So the real answer to that question is what's my source of funds? So the time frame for a loan is not going to depend on the size of it. It's going to depend on who the source and the matching of funds that's there. So if you go to a commercial bank, what is the liability on most commercial banks? What's the major liability on a commercial bank?
Default.
What is the significant liability?
Oh, they lend out loans to businesses.
What is the significant liability?
They don't make any money off the loans they lend.
What is
They don't have enough loan in place.
assets equal liabilities plus owner's equity? In a bank's balance sheet, a bank's assets are what?
Yeah.
Loans. What's a bank's liabilities?
The deposits.
They're dead.
Personal
Deposits, depositors, right? And short-term loans that they borrow from other banks. But their biggest source of funds, their biggest source of capital are depositors like you and I. What's the time horizon on your deposits at the bank? They're all short-term in nature. And so from an asset liability management perspective, the ALCO committee at a bank cannot match short-term obligations with long-term assets. Because what happens? What happens when you need to borrow, you get your money back? You're done, right? Okay, so because of this, most commercial banks tend to loan shorter term. in conjunction, what is the cost associated with these deposits typically? Most of these things are demand deposits, right? Variable rate or no rate. So what do you think they will do? Do you think they will do a lot of fixed rate over here? So historically, pre-hedging, pre-derivatives, right? Pre-financial sophistication, a commercial bank provided short-term loans at variable rates. In the real estate industry, what does that translate into? Construction loans, mini permanents for people whose buildings, for example, aren't stabilized yet, right? So I buy a building, it's only 40% occupied, right? If you borrow 70% of its value is going to be predicated on its cash flow, you're not going to get anything from the bank, right? Because the bank is underwriting the cash flow from the building, not the brick and mortar. They're underwriting cash flow. So you're not going to get a long-term loan because you're not going to get squat, right? And let's jump to long-term debt for one quick second because of the matching, and let's assume a life insurance company, right?
Yeah.
So you got a life insurance policy?
I do actually.
You should. Good for you. Good for you. You have a beneficiary.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
No, I'm just trying to think about who it is because it changed over a few years ago. Anyways, I do have a life insurance.
I got a new girlfriend.
I'm going to say it's my mother, you know.
Yes, no.
If it's your mother, it never has to change. And then she can give the money to whoever she liked, you know.
That's my dad. Yeah.
Okay, all right, but what you're doing is, what are you doing with a life insurance company, right? What are you doing to a life insurance company?
Making monthly payments for.
So you're paying premiums over here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to have a liability to you somewhere down the line, right? They're going to have an obligation somewhere down the line, right? And they got all this money today, right? So, you know, they've got these, you know, tables that say, hey, we got to convert this cash into some sort of investment that's going to tie in with when this guy kicks the bucket, right? So these guys are likely to say, hey, I'll loan for a long time because all I care about is having the money when this guy croaks, all right? Now, in exchange for that, when they loan money, what are they going to say to people? We talked about things like reinvestment risk, right? And we talked about things like call protection, right? And we talked about defeasance and yield maintenance, right, in a capital markets class. Why is that in place? Because they need to maintain that asset liability balance, right? So, because of that, when you get involved in a long-term loan as a borrower, you're going to have a stiff penalty to get out. So, if your asset's not stabilized, you're going to go to the commercial bank and get 3-year money. You may get less, but it may not be a fixed rate, which you want, but you also don't have a stabilized income stream, right? So back to your point, what you historically have seen is the commercial banks tend to be huge construction lenders, right? Mini perm, stabilization, owner-occupied businesses. So, you know, commercial banks tend to finance mid-sized businesses, right? So a doctor's practice, 10 doctors, whatever, they own their building, they own their own surgical center, whatever, they'll loan. They love that because the guys are invested in it, okay? This tends to be longer-term financing, stabilized, fully stabilized buildings, okay? Long-term debt and some sort of call protection on it so that the lender doesn't run a reinvestment risk, okay? So, you know, it's a long answer to your question, but it's not size, it's the source. Now, you can throw some of this out because what's happening is with derivatives, banks are taking loans out longer, right? So, you know, I remember a commercial bank when they wouldn't do a 10-year loan. They'll do 10-year commercial loans now, okay? Now, on the residential side, to your point, who were the traditional, this is all capital market stuff. I mean, I thought you guys learned all this stuff. But who were the traditional lenders for single-family residences? Who were the historical lenders to single-family
It
residents?
used to be SNL.
Savings and loans institutions. So what would you do? As Coral Gables Federal Savings and Loan, I was a loan ranger. I deposit my dollar every day. I get my passbook, right? So they would pay me 3% interest, right? And they would turn around and do what? Make a 6% mortgage to me, right? And that all worked till the S&Ls blew up. Okay? Now, why does the residential model work today with 30-year mortgages?
Derivatives, they package them up and.
Well, not so much the derivatives, but the fact that they are securitized and sold off, and there is sufficient demand out there for yield. But what's the average life of a mortgage in this country anyway? 7 years. So why is there institutional interest for that income stream? Because at the end of the day, you're not going to have to wait the 30 years. Because over the long term, plus because it's a liquid market, whoever buys those certificates can turn around and sell them to somebody else, and they can't sit around and wait. Okay, so because you've got this liquidity in the markets, you're able to maintain the same historical trend, even though it's not the same source. Yeah?
Yeah.
Good?
Yeah.
Okay. Now you can answer the question in a capital mark. Now you can pass the class? Okay. Does it make sense? I mean, this is crazy, or?
No, that makes sense.
I want to kind of ask a question about how do you buy loans? Like,
How do you buy a loan?
Yeah, how do you value it? Is it like $1 million of the lifetime of the loan, or do you buy at a time frame and it creates value for you?
Well, so I don't invest in debt. I'm not an expert. There's a lot of different ways to invest in debt, but the difference between, it's another we should have learned all this stuff already, okay? So debt is an obligation of a company, and it's an obligation of a company to pay what? To repay what? The face value. The face value of that note, right? So, in theory, in exchange for that, there is a, something we called coupon, right? Coupon was derived from interest, right? And interest was what? The interest was the cost of borrowing money, or the reward for the postponement of consumption. This should make sense.
The capital markets.
Yeah, you don't have to take a class anymore.
It's saying it's a credit. It's saying I haven't taken it. So you need some credit.
So you get face value, and you get this compensation or this reward for postponing that consumption when you get the face value and consume it, right? So there's no residual value there. There's no residual gain there. Whereas when you equity, the difference with equity is that you basically, equity is a residual ownership in a company after you pay off all the obligations. So presumably if there's value creation, it will always be on the equity piece, right? Now, we've talked about participating loans, we've talked about convertible, pieces and all that. So there's a way to make debt participate in the equity. But for the most part, debt is rewarded with coupon, and that's it. Now, can you make money buying debt? Well, there is something else that we talked about in the class, and we talked about duration, and we talked about convexity, and we talked basically about the inverse relationship that exists between interest rates and a face value, right? Right? So if interest rates went up, the value of the obligation went down, right? So, can you make money buying debt? Well, if interest rates go down and you hold debt and then you sell it, you can make money because you bought it at a certain level and the value's gone up, right?
Yeah.
So that's the only time that I know that you can make money on debt.
So not now.
So if interest, that's why buying fixed income instruments is very difficult in rising interest rate environments.
That's why mortgage REITs right now are making a lot of money, but when interest rates rise, all the people who invested in mortgage REITs are going to have problems.
Well, and then they're, you know, very highly levered, so they're very, very sensitive to, you know, to what's happening. But, so, you know, the only other way that you could, quote, make money on buying debt is if you buy distressed debt. And so, you know, it's kind of like the article you showed, was it you who showed me the article on the guy that you go, you know, you need money, right? So, yeah, there are always people that are willing to buy distressed debt. We said earlier that the bonds for J. Crew were selling at 27 cents on the dollar. So you can buy J. Crew debt at 27 cents on the dollar under the presumption that they're either going to make it and you're going to get your coupon, or they're going to restructure and you're going to get at least equivalent value or more in equity or in some sort of new debt, or somebody perceives that the prospects of that company are going to go up, right? And then you'll be able to sell it for 50-something cents on the dollar. People play that a lot with emerging market debt. So you could probably buy, I would imagine, Brazilian debt today, sovereign debt at a deep discount. So you're willing to assume the risk they're not going to default, but sometime before maturity, their prospects will rise, and hopefully you can make a lot of money because you've effectively bought discounted debt. Okay? Make sense? We really got away from our topic though. And so we're going to work on our project now.
Now we're done.
So our project is the following. Okay.
No passing notes in class.
Yeah.
That was great. No text, like the text.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm in elementary school. I feel like
Oh yeah.
Yes, no, maybe so.
I'm in elementary. I'm in elementary school again. So.
No.
Oh, you need to know? I'm gonna take your smiley face away.
Is it worth it?
Okay. Listen. So I'm going to try to group you all with different people every week, but to maintain certain consistency, I'm going to have whoever I sent the stuff to last week is going to get stuff from me in a few minutes. Okay? So just listen to this. This is how we're going to break up. Ryan, you're going to be with Claudius, Quincy, and Marianela. Okay? Stephen, you're going to have Christian and Brandon with you. Alexander, you're going to have Janae, Winston, and Andre. Chad, you're going to have Frederick. Well, Luis is no longer with us. And Emmanuel.
That guy?
That guy. Yeah, he was complaining about his neighbors.
Sorry.
Maricela. Victor and Diana are going to work with you today, and Irene, Rebecca, and Kyle are going to work with you today. Okay? Now. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to get in groups. Last week I sent you all information from brokerage offices, right? And in the case of multifamily, who had the multifamily group last week? Okay, you have the REE report.
No, we retail. Never mind. Sorry.
We did multifamily. He gave us the wrong numbers.
Yeah, but Stephen had it.
Yeah, whoever had it.
Stephen had it, yeah.
They're the same report in there.
Yeah, but you weren't with him.
I know, I was retail.
Okay. So, but you had reads. So you already have in your, while I'm distributing additional information, you already have within your grasp not only comparable lease data, but all those quarterly reports from the brokerage firms and the quarterly one from REES also have resale information. Okay? But in addition to that, what I'm going to give you now, and I'm going to email to all of you, is I'm going to email to you real capital analytics information related to the asset class that you were working with. So you're going to stay with the same asset class and geography with which you worked with last week. So Ryan, you're still working with office in Palm Beach, okay? Stephen, you're still working with multifamily in Dade County. Alexander, you're still working with retail in Broward. Chad, you're still working with industrial in Dade. Maricela, you're working with office in Broward. And Irene, you're working with hospitality in Dade County and, you know, generically Florida. But what I want to ask everyone to do is, it's the following. So the first thing I'm going to give you is, I'm sending RCA information, which I've signed my life on personally for strict academic use. Please, please, I'm warning you, do not take it outside the classroom and not use it for personal use. Okay? You know, you could get, well, we used to be able to get REEs till somebody burned it or whatever. Most of this stuff is readily available some other place. But I'm sharing information with you that I've signed a non-disclosure agreement for, strictly for academic use. So let's keep its use in here, okay? So I'm going to send for each one of those asset classes to you the most recent RCA data related to market transactions, okay? Those of you who have seen, who have been in my capital markets class, which is most of you, have seen that I've taken RCA data and given you information relative to prices per square foot that are being paid for asset classes, for specific assets, nationally and locally in Florida. And I've also broken it down between the different types of assets. So if, for example, we're talking about office in Palm Beach, we can be as specific as to say, what does CBD office sell for in Palm Beach, and what does suburban office sell for in Palm Beach. And not only can we say, what does it sell for on a per square foot basis, but we can also talk about relative valuation. What is the cap rate associated with that? Okay, but what I would like you to do at least is broadly, at least look at the state in which you're working in. And so get a sense and say, hey, if I'm in retail, there are 3 or 4 different, you know, classifications of retail, right? So CBRE had 3, you know, the freestanding, and Real Capital Analytics has a different classification. But you can still come to the class, because what I would like at the end is very similar to last week, that you come up and talk about your asset class, right? And what the sales comp environment is like. So, you know, hey, I'm here to talk to you about office. You know, office is trading, you know, roughly suburban office trades for $185 a square foot in Florida. You know, those buildings are trading at about a 7.8 cap rate. You know, they tend to be roughly 120 to 150,000 square foot buildings. So the average transaction is, you know, $32 million. There were 47 sales of suburban office buildings in Florida last year for a total of this. That contrasts with a peak year of 2006 where there were 157 transactions, okay? And then you say, and in particular, I'm talking about suburban Fort Lauderdale, okay? And in suburban Fort Lauderdale, we had 3 transactions. The average price is this. The cap rate is that. Does it make sense? Yeah. Yeah? You're looking at, yeah? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so let's work for an hour. This is a lot easier than last week. Work for an hour, and at 3 o'clock, we're going to have presentations again so that we learn about all the different asset classes and what the comp set looks like in our particular submarkets, okay? And if
I'm in your group again, right?
I'm in your group again?
Like, yeah, okay. I just wasn't sure if he said your group or hers.
Did you guys write down what
And if any of you have CoStar and you want to specifically hone in to your submarket and specifically identify 1 or 2 or 3 assets that transacted, you can do that as well. But you don't need to do that, okay? Is the requirement clear? Okay, it's 2 o'clock. Get to work.
You sending us something, or you haven't read it?
Do you want PowerPoint?
No, I'm not.
What I would say, no, I'm going to send it right now. Hey, the question is, PowerPoint or no? What I would say is, I think this particular presentation would be helpful to have 1 slide with the summary data that you could talk to, okay? I don't think you need to have a whole bunch of stuff, but I think one, and maybe two, but really, one slide of summary information would be helpful.
No. He's got to send the stuff. He's sending it in.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to send it right now.
Okay.
Okay, Chad, your email was?
CM2585
at Nova. Okay, you're here, right? So I can. Chad, you've got industrial, right?
So, like any data
Okay, Chad, you should have it. Alex, you are?
Retail for hours.
Email.
AA21.
Okay, you're going to use the one here?
Yeah.
AA21 at Nova?
So AA2133 at Nova.
So,
You need retail, right?
Yeah.
So RCA data is national and statewide, and you can cull from the report.
I also have CoStar as well. I can pull
If you want to pull a comparable set from, if you want to like pull a couple of transactions from there just to give indicative ones, that's fine. No, but get used to using RCA's good data.
I know it's great data. I used it the other class here. It's good stuff. I just don't have access to it.
46.
Hold on, Chad, it didn't go through to you.
CM.
Espera, un segundito.
I'll send an email. That's probably
CM2585.
correct.
Give me another one. It says office. Listen, by the way, there's just one quick second. I don't know if are you guys aware that the whole Exchange server environment is changing here at Nova?
No.
They're going to well, I got an email the other day that said, just as a reminder, this weekend they're switching to Office 365. So,
Yeah, well, they've been on that for a while.
not us, not faculty.
We know that.
Okay, well, okay. Listen, can you give me another one?
Right.
Give me a Gmail or something.
Chadwick.max.
I haven't received it. Espérate, niña, no te lo he mandado todavía. Espérate, es este niño. I just told her to chill.
okay. My Spanish yesterday
Okay, Chadwick, give me a Chadwick. Chadwick.
This was office in.
Dot Maxey, M-A-X-E-Y.
Correct.
At Gmail. Okay, you should have it now.
Got it.
Hey, Alex, they're all getting kicked back to me, so I need like a non-Nova address, please.
W.
It's not anything weird, is it?
No, my last name, so if you have it there. W, my last name. Vidiella,
Espérate, W-V-D-A.
Vidiella. So D-I-D-I-E-double-L-A.
W-V-I-D-I-E-A-A.
Yeah, at Gmail.
Okay, Stephen, your non-Nova email address.
SS. Last name.
Wash, I got it at Gmail, right? Okay, I put, and you've got, multifamily, right? Konya, I just sent you a
You
message.
didn't send me anything, you sent me a blank email, by the way, there's no attachment.
No.
We need to get a time extension?
No.
The damages?
What is that?
What do you got, retail over there?
Yeah, retail per hour.
Oh. You guys are making me nervous here. Okay, Chad, did you get it?
I did.
I wonder why he didn't get it. Okay, no, so we did lease last week, this week we're doing sales comp. Pumford, R. Pumford?
Yes, at Gmail.
No, I just put like.
Oh, no, I know, I sent it, yes.
Hold on. Okay.
I'm coming. He's got office, right?
I just don't know what's the difference
I guess he should see it like market.
Okay, Steven.
Oh, no,
Let me resend it now.
Or if
If
they're
we're
just
just
on
national data, national data, so we take the national data, which is there, and our.
There's no state.
yeah, so good.
Region, they have.
Yeah, go to south.
Just wait.
I don't know, yes, I need
He didn't. I need a non-Nova address, please.
YRE Tamayo at gmail.com.
No, for our presentation.
What they're selling for,
No, good, that's a good one. Whoa, actually.
Yeah, well, this is the comps, right? This is taking into account all of the different ones that they're tracking. And they track. I just kept seeing those.
It's like 1,000 a month per year. I just know I have it
For work?
my job. So I might still have it as a new job. It takes like 2 months to shut the program, so we can start on a very limited basis.
Professor, can you try mine, because you want to get your email?
You didn't get it?
Can I give you mine?
Yes, Steven.
Maricusa.
Oh, yeah, got it.
You got it.
Maricusa.
Well, that's my Gmail.
Maricusa online?